Move on to the class. We're going through the book of Revelations, the seven churches. The letters of the seven churches represent seven stages. Advice that's from the innermost core, from your soul, represents advice to handle the seven different stages until you reach what is commonly called enlightenment. And that's what the disciple is going for. The first stage is Ephesus. He gets permission to ignore established authorities and be his own authority representing by receiving from his own soul. And then he kind of deviates from the path, and he has to come back in Smyrna, and then in Pergamos he learns. He screws up by trying to do good, but he doesn't know how to do it right, and he often screws up more than he does, more good harm than good, and so he has to get back on the path. And the last one we talked about was Thyatira, where he tried to do good works again, but he's hindered, and he's captured again by subtle energies of the beast. So he escaped the main things like the standard churches and everything. Then he goes off into different avenues that he explores, and he still gets deceived by outer authorities. And then he has to get back on. And so the next step is Sardis. And it begins this way. And unto the angel of the church of Sardis write, these things saith he that hath the seven spirits of God and the seven stars. I know thy works, that thou hast a name, and thou livest, and yet art dead. Okay, so Sardis means red ones. Sardis was a particularly luxurious city. Now, it's interesting that it's red. The interesting part about red, it's the lowest vibration of all the colors, the seven colors that we see with our eyes. And so it represents the fact that here the disciple loses focus on the soul and focuses on the more material needs of life. And so he gets advice from that viewpoint, that the inner soul sees that, well, he's kind of drifting away from the soul again. And each one of these seven stages, the soul has to give correction, because going from just being an average person to a perfected disciple takes many steps, and there's many mistakes that are made on the path. So first of all, he says, he keeps repeating that he represents the seven spirits of God and the seven stars, because the disciple has to keep being reminded of the truths that he has accepted in the past, and then he deviates from. So the repetition here is symbolic of the fact that we need to be told certain things over and over in order to ensure that we stay on the path, because it's so easy to get spiritual amnesia. Spiritual revelations and things from the soul is a little bit like a dream. You notice when you wake up from a dream, you maybe remember it pretty clear for a few minutes, and then once you get out of bed, all of a sudden the dream may be gone. Okay, so it's interesting that the dream can be there 1 minute, and then the next minute it's gone. And spiritual revelations from the your inner core are a little bit like that. Is that when you receive them, it seems pretty clear and seems like you're always going to be in that consciousness. But then, as we get distracted by the material side of life, it's like that consciousness just can seem to go away. Now, the goal is to be able to keep that consciousness, keep our minds steady in the light. And keeping our minds steady in the light, that's the hard part. That's the challenge. So he reminds us that within your inner core, your inner Christ, hath the seven spirits of God. Now, Sardis represents red ones. That's just like representing the one Spirit of God. Here he's reminded there's not just one, there are seven. And the seven stars represent the angels of the seven churches, or the aspiring disciples in their various stages of progression. And this tells us too that, the message that's important for you to receive isn't just what I'm telling you now, but this whole package, the whole thing I'm given about the seven churches needs to be absorbed. The individual lessons are good and helpful, but they're all connected to each other. Now, it's interesting. He says, he calls the angels of the seven churches stars, and the angels of the seven churches are us as individual consciousness. But it's interesting to consider what a star is. A star is really a sun. Now look at our sun up there on a clear day. It's so bright you can't really look at it directly. But you look at just say a single star in the heavens at night. Many of those stars are a lot bigger and brighter than our sun. Yet they are so far away that they don't seem to be like our sun. But many of them are even greater than our sun. So it compares us to like stars in the fact that each star we see in the heavens is really a blazing sun, if it was close enough. But we are like so far from our souls that our soul seems just like a star rather than a sun. But when we merge with our soul, we get closer and closer to that star until it becomes a sun. And then we have soul contact and merging with the soul. So once we're in daylight where the sun is up there, the sun is impossible to ignore. But a star in the heavens is very easy to ignore. It's almost like it's not there, but it is there. And so this is the goal, is to take that still small point, which is compared to a star, and come closer to it so that you're close enough to it that it becomes like a sun. So the inner Christ says, he hath both the seven spirits as well as the seven stars. He's saying that in the dim light, the seeker is the same light that blazes in our higher natures. So the master starts by telling us this to remind us how important it is to find that higher part of ourselves. Now, the disciple sometimes feels here like God has forsaken him, because it says, I know thy works, thou livest and yet are dead. And so, but if he's diligent, he can hear the inner voice when he reaches the stage. Now he says, I have not forsaken you. I hold you close to me and call you my own, just as I do the archangels before my throne. And so the voice continues, I know thy works, that thou hast a name, and thou livest, and thou art dead. Now, what does he mean when he says, thou hast a name? Any idea what he means when he says this to him? You have a name. Jill, you have a name. Is it Jill or something else?
Well,
What,
that's,
what is the name?
I'm kind of going back to Joshua's question earlier. It's not the name of my soul, because I think I understood Joshua's question and I kind of identified with it in a strange way. My name provides my earthly body with an identity and a personality, but it doesn't really encapsulate who I am, because it's not taking into consideration my soul. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question that you're posing about what the name means. I think that just on a superficial level, it provides my earthly body with an identity, with and my personality with an identity.
And what's the identity of your true self?
My true self is my soul.
Right, and your soul is like what?
Or your master.
What self? Master or your Christ self, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's
Right.
like the Christ within, right?
So your true name, now later on in the book of Revelations, it talks about the 144,000 having the name of God in their foreheads. And
Well,
yeah,
when Jacob had a wrestling match with an angel out in the land of Peniel, which I think is symbolic of opening the Peniel Center, he wrestled with the angel until the break of dawn, and the angel threw his thigh out of joint, and it made Jacob so mad that he pinned him. And the angel said, "Let me up." And Jacob said, "Not until you give me a new name and a blessing." And his new name was Israel, which meant to prevail as a god. So that was the new name given to Jacob. So it could be something along those lines, that a new name is something that we receive from our soul that identifies us with our soul.
right. It's what when it says thou has a name, so what it's really saying is you share the name of God. But the name of God is something that can't be spoken in the English language. And it can't be spoken in language at all. That's why the actual name is not given out, but it's a name that's registered in our consciousness. And thou hast a name. When you have a true name, it means you recognize your true identity as being one with God. Yet thou art dead. In other words, the disciples having a problem here. He has the name, but he's not using it, and he's ignoring the God within. So he's suffering a spiritual disconnection here. And he goes through periods where he feels kind of distant from God. In other words, he feels that, well, you know, maybe I'm rejected by my inner Christ or by God or whatever he's thinking, and maybe I'm pretty much on my own. And has anyone ever gone through that before? Like you feel connected at one time, and then all of a sudden you go through a period where you feel like, boy, I guess little bit like Jesus on the cross where he says, my God, why have thou forsaken me? Has anyone gone through a period like that?
I feel like that now.
How long have you felt that way, right?
Ever since that vision where I said I shouldn't know this. I basically told whatever master I was with that I don't deserve or I'm not good enough or some lie like that. And I've been ill since and haven't been back to being myself again.
The one where you were in space?
Yeah. At the edge of creation. Yeah. As soon as I recognized what I was looking at, I had the thought, I can't know this. I'm not supposed to know this. I'm not good enough to know this. All of those thoughts came at the same time and slammed me back into my body. And I've been ill since. I mean, it's getting worse and worse and worse. But yeah, I haven't had any more dreams either. I haven't had any more visions. Nothing.
Yeah, and this is a problem we have. We go through these periods, and we're gonna. It's often called we call it the dark night of the soul. But the disciple searches within one more time, and he's in desperate need of instruction, and so he feels disconnected, like well, maybe I'm just unworthy or whatever. And then he receives this next statement, be watchful, strengthen those things which remain that are ready to die, for I have not found thy works perfect before God. So when he goes through this dry spell, he gets this impression, strengthen those things which remain. There's certain things that you've developed, you receive certain perceptions, certain revelations, if you've done certain things that are right, focus on them, strengthen those things which you have. So we could talk to you, Rain, and say, think of the virtues and the good things that you have in life, strengthen those, focus on them. He says, but I have not found your works perfect before God. So he learns that one of the reasons he's lost some of the sensitivity of the inner voice is the quality of his works haven't been up to standard. In other words, he's focused just on part of the spectrum, the red part, which is the concerns of the physical life. He's been very concerned about the physical life. He's found out maybe he explored a lot of spiritual things and found out, hey, I have to focus on making a living, taking care of my family, getting a new house, all these things. And so he's focusing on the material side. And when he does this, he takes his attention off the inner voice. And so he's reminded him here that we've not found your works perfect yet. So the solution, he says, is to be watchful. Now, Socrates told us the unexamined life is not worth living. So we must examine our lives, find out, keep track of ourselves, because it's like the example I keep giving. If you have a light and you turn the intensity down very slowly, you don't notice it. But if you turn it up all at one time, you will be aware of how low the light was for that period of time. And so this is what happens. We switch our attention over to the concerns of the physical world, and the light starts to dim. And this takes us through that period that we call the dark night of the soul. So the next verse then says, remember therefore how thou hast received and heard, and hold fast and repent. If therefore thou shalt not watch. I will come unto thee as a thief, and thou shalt not know what hour I will come upon thee. So here's the solution to the dark night. He says, remember therefore how thou hast received and heard. Okay. So at this point, the disciple is at his fifth step. He's received quite a bit in the past. He's received a number of impressions. And now his attention has been focused on the material side, and the light has started to dim. And he says, remember, think back on the times that you have received and heard the voice of the Christ within, the voice of the soul. Can you identify with that? Has there been times in your life where you kind of felt disconnected, but then when you think back to the times when you have received, it kind of stimulates you somewhat? How about you, Adam? Can you identify with that?
Are you talking to me?
Sure am.
Can you repeat the question? I was just I was texting a friend.
Okay, so we're talking about how the disciple at this point, he's gone through a number of spiritual experiences, but now he's focusing on taking care of the physical side of his life. And he's taken his attention off of the inner. And it says the solution of it, he's going through what he calls the dark night. And the solution, it says, remember therefore how thou hast received and heard, and hold fast and repent. In other words, reverse your course. So have you ever been through that to where you felt somewhat disconnected, but then you think back to times when you were more connected, and that helps?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think life is quite a roller coaster, and you go through these ups and downs quite a bit. And I think one thing that helps is just the principle of steady exercise. And it doesn't have to be dramatic, but going back to the things that helped get me to a spiritual state, which might just be rereading some of the works that have inspired me to move ahead on the path, remembering to do some meditation regularly, and then it also helps to do some resets. Fasting is a good one. Doing some long fasting is usually a good reset for me.
I remember you told me once about how you went through a period of about 3 months where you felt like really close to the spirit.
Yeah, it was more like 9. I would say that was it was right after I quit my job abruptly, went through some interesting experiences, kind of got off some of the prescription drugs I was on, and just went through a real time of exploration, found your writings, and I felt what I could only describe as the peace that passeth all. And it lasted for probably about 9 months, because I was in this state of constantly just learning new things, absorbing all these great teachings that had nourished me after years of just feeling like I was in drought from being in the Mormon church.
Now, where you're involved in a startup business, probably taking a lot of attention, do you find that sometimes reflecting back on that kind of helps?
Yeah, I mean, it's the one thing that I can point to that is, it's undeniable. I mean, that is always a memory that will be in me.
And most disciples have things in their life. Now, Rain, you said you feel like you're going through a dark night. Can you think of times in your life where you felt really close? to the inner spirit?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, here it says that's part of the solution for you, is to reflect on that. He says, remember therefore how you have received and how you heard, and hold fast.
I would love that.
Yeah,
Hey, one more time, can you go back over we found your works not perfected? Your works were not good?
yeah. In other
Was-
words, it's basically telling us here in this section that the problem with his works are all related for a period of time to taking care of, you know, life in the body and the physical plane, making sure he can pay the rent and buy food and take care of his health and things like that. So the disciple goes through this period, and it takes, we have to do that, of course, but if too much attention is on the world, then we don't do any spiritual work, and so our focus becomes dim. And so he says, remember therefore how thou hast received and heard, and hold fast. Hold fast to reflect on those things, bring them back again, so that you can put your focus on the inner core like you have in the past. Okay. It says, if you don't do this, I will come as a thief, and thou shalt not know what hour I will come. And so what happens is, if we continue to not go back to focusing on the inner self, the recognition of that will come as a thief. And how does it come? It generally will often come in the form of another person. You will come across another, if you're ignoring the inner self, you will come across another person that is not ignoring the inner self, and he will be like the coming of Christ to you as a thief in the night, and he will remind you, this is where you need to be. And either the person will reject it or accept it at that time. But that reminder that he has will be painful when he sees, well, this is where I could have been. I could be where this person is. And so that's interesting to think about. Okay, any more comments on that point? The next is concerns the outer garment. The voice says, thou hast a few names, even in Sardis, which have not defiled their garments, and they shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy. So when the disciple arrives at this point, it says some of them kind of handle it fine and keep that contact, even though there's lots of distractions in the material world. The material world offers a tremendous number of distractions for us. But even though there's a lot of distractions, there's some of the disciples have managed to not defile themselves. In other words, a number of disciples have been able to enter this dark night where they feel that maybe God has deserted them, but they continue anyway the best they can. And he says, this is good. And they have not defiled their garments. They shall walk with me in white. Now the Sardis period, like I said, is like the dark night of the soul. And here the seeker must move forward, even though he may be discouraged and he feels maybe he's a far distance from the spiritual power. Many give up at this time for a period. Nobody gives up forever, but people get discouraged, and some of the disciples at this point will say, well, I just got to focus on making a living, and heck with the spiritual side. It's not really working out. And others will continue the best they can. It's like Paul says, we must be vigilant in season and out of season. In other words, in good times and bad. When we feel connected and when we don't feel connected, we must reflect on those things which we have received and hold on to them, because when we're going through a dark night, we need to still continue as if we are connected. So think of that the next time you feel like you've been deserted. Just have that as if mentality. I consider yourself connected even if you don't feel connected. And then pretty soon the connection will come back. It will come back faster that way. Now, what does that mean to defile one's garments? It says there are certain people that have not defiled their garments. Any idea what that would mean?
Can I take a stab at it?
Yeah.
Well, garments are something that we use to cover ourselves with. So they're like outer masks or coverings. And if we defile them, then we have like lost, if they're dirty, then people see our outer garments, like we've lost our reputation.
Okay, you're on the right track here. The outer garment is your activities in the world. The world itself is the outer garment. And so it's easy to get defiled when we have to put our attention on making a living. So now, none of us in making a living probably feel like that's a spiritual high. Now, Curtis does a lot of climbing trees and stuff in his work. Maybe he feels kind of close to nature since he's works a lot with that. But say
I do. I'm up on yesterday I had geese flying over and ducks flying over, and I really feel connected with nature. And then, but also the people that I work for, I get to spend a little time with them, and I have a packet of spiritual stuff that when the time is right, or if I feel inclined, I can share with them, and just kind of give them a little up. So yeah, I have kind of a spiritual side to my material labor.
Yeah, so Curtis is doing his best to not defile his garments, to make his physical work blend in with the spiritual. But then there's other people that have more difficult time. Let's say you're a used car salesman and your boss wants you to fudge a little bit here and there. And in this way, the guy winds up having to defile his garment, his outer work. Defiles his connection with the inner spirit. So it's important that what we choose to make a living at is pretty important. We need to choose something that doesn't take us away from the inner self. Curtis seems to be making the best of it there with his connection, but this is a difficult thing for many of us, because sometimes the disciple is forced to take a job that's not far from his number one choice, because he just has to make a living, and maybe the job forces him to focus on the material side, or maybe to be deceptive a lot more than he wants. Any comment on that? Okay, then how do you walk with God in white? He says that's an unusual phrase, walk with God in white. Now remember, Sardis represented one color. Walking with God in white. White is a combination of all the colors. So to walk with God in white is to walk with God in wholeness. Wholeness is the outer garment, the inner garment, the outer self, the inner self, everything looking at it as a whole, rather than having to focus just on one part. He that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. And when people read this, they think of Jesus up there talking and he's going to judge us, but who this voice represents you. You are this voice. The true self within yourself is the one speaking. And he's telling you that when you overcome, when you become whole, you will be clothed in white, and white represents wholeness. And I will not blot your name out of the book of life. And the book of life is written on your inner core. In other words, you will not lose contact with this inner self. And this is the struggle he's been going through. He's been in and out of contact. And he's told that if he performs correctly, that his name will continue to be in the book of life. In other words, he will receive the life of the spirit. That inner contact will continue to flow.
So he will go no more out of that, the door that swings both ways, but will stay galvanized into that connected state with his soul, right?
Yeah, right. And another interesting thing about white, he talks about being dressed in white. If you say, if you go to a party and there's some guy dressed completely in white, he would really stand out. I mean, how often do you meet a person just in casual contact that's just all dressed in white? So by making that comment, he's pointing out that when you do put on wholeness, that people will recognize you. They'll think something different about this guy. Now, if they're ready to accept greater light, they'll be attracted. If they're in the darkness themselves, they'll be repelled. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. Again, this is a reminder, and he keeps saying this over and over, because we need to be reminded again and again. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the inner self, listen to that inner voice, because this will guide you correctly. It will guide you through this dark night. You feel like you're deserted, but you aren't. That's just an illusion. The Christ, the inner Christ is there always. And if you don't feel it, then act as if you are in contact, and then pretty soon that contact will be reestablished. Okay, that pretty much ends our dissertation on Sardis, the fifth stage of discipleship. Any comment on that before we sign off for questions? So where you guys figure you are at? Anybody here going through their dark night? Rain kind of figures she is. How
You
about,
know what's funny?
yeah,
From the very first time you taught us about dark night of the soul, it struck a chord in me like I had been shot with a spear, like a lance going through me. And all I could think of was, please, no, not that. I don't want to do that. Please don't, not that one. I don't want that one. That's all I ever thought about.
okay, well, think back on all the times that you felt close to the Spirit and reflect on them. That's one of the solutions, and that'll help you reconnect.
Amen.
Yeah, I find that's really good advice myself. Because all of us have go through cycles. We feel close and then we get distracted and we ignore the spiritual side, and then we get close again. So we need to focus. Think back on your life of times that you felt the inner peace, the inner joy, the inner connection, and this will help us to reconnect. Okay, any other comments or questions?
JJ, have you ever read the book called The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Silverman?
Yeah, a long time ago, I read that. when
I
it
go
first
back
came
to
out.
that book to reconnect. That book helps me a lot.
Yeah.
I must have read it 20 times.
Really?
There's a
Really?
movie too.
Really?
It's
Yeah.
it strikes it resonates with me very, very deeply.
And that's what we have to do, go back to what resonates. And if a
Right.
particular book inspired you, then I know one that really inspired me was the Aquarian Gospel. And
Yeah, I've read that too. Yeah, I can see where that would resonate with a lot of people.
yeah, I'm thinking of
Yeah.
reading it again because it's really inspiring. Before I read that, I kind of thought of Jesus as being somebody so far beyond me that I could never be like him, you know. But when
Yeah.
I read that, it made him appear more like just somebody like me that was doing his darndest. And that gave me a lot of encouragement when I read that.
Yep.
And
Yeah, he said, what I am, all men shall be, what I've done, all men shall do. You know, he really made himself connectable so you could identify with who he was. And then when he was almost tempted by that beautiful woman, it made his heart to burn. And you kind of really identified with what he was going through, you know, all of his trials.
yeah, that's trouble. You read the Bible, you don't really identify with him because, well, he's tempted by the devil and he just resisted it all. It was no problem. But when we're tempted, it seems to be a big problem for us. So that's what inspired me about that is it made him more human and more divine in my eyes. But yeah, go back to a book or also a person. If there's a person in your life that makes you feel more connected, reconnect with that person. And your memories go back to the time that's perhaps the easiest and most powerful. Reflect on those high moments of your life. Okay, my friends, good vibes among the group today, and we will see you next week about 2 p.m. All being well on next Sunday.
I read the Tibetan every morning, and that inspires me. And sometimes when I hear the ways of preachings from the past, I tend to rebel against it. But I realize that we stand on the head and shoulders of the past.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Ed, is to just take a writing that you feel is inspired and read a little bit of it every morning. Kind of sets a tone. So that's a good way to go. Okay, any other comment? Well, appreciate all of you guys, and we'll see you next week.